Leslie, do you want to do it or do you want me to do it? Start us off. Okay. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:04. And I will do a roll call. Froncel Burns, Camry Tharp. Here. Casey Whittle.
Here.
Cassie Hollinshead. Here. Jonathan Bush. And Angela Quorum. So we will do the approval of the minutes from the April 14th meeting. They should have been sent out to you guys.
I'll move to approve.
One second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So we're down to item C1, follow up and finish discussion on any previously discussed articles from the Home Rule Charter. Leslie, do you want to take it or you want Gary to take it?
Got an update. Only just one. I apologize, but I've been under the weather for most of the last couple of weeks, so I don't have a updated update. But, once we get through this, we will, after tonight's meeting, talk about all the articles short. And so I'll then do the next throughout some, so we'll be here. The changes that'll be in that next version from the changes we've looked at is, as we were going through there, we got to the administrative section and there were specific references to some departments, police department, city secretary and manager, and your consensus was that rather than emphasize specific departments or have specific departments listed in the chart, that we would take those out and just refer to all city departments, except for those departments or positions that are actually appointed. So there would be a specific section for the city manager, city secretary, legal, and municipal. And so that next version will take those main sections, put everything under the section. Part of what we're looking at tonight in Article 9 goes back to, which is talking about development and so will fall in that same category. Because the draft you have is the first way we went through there. So it's showing you changes to the way planning, zoning, development is handled in the current charter changes right now. Based upon the discussions we had after this meeting, subject to whatever changes, agreements we have on that, I would probably take all of those out and just move them. I think the reasoning to me is the same. You don't really need a stupid plan or any of it. You should just talk about the functions of the city council, and all of those also they'll all work to streamline the current charter and to clarify that form the city White House's council management form is really more of a corporate business-like approach. So you have city council, it's the board of directors. They're the ultimate decision makers on there. Yes, that's where you money. They have to actually vote on spend money. But they set policy. And by setting policy, they give direction kind of on the charter, or they adopt ordinances. Well, one of the things we've been doing in this charter is kind of take some things out of the charter that really don't need to be voted on by the public at large. They should be voted on the current city council about how many departments you really do that every year when you adopt a budget. That's main things in the budget is you decide what's the organizational structure of the city, how much money do you have, who's going to do what. And so you're really organizing the city every year. And you're also, the cities this size, even big cities in Texas, You have turnover, so you're, in each budget, you're adjusting to the personnel you actually pays. Some budgets, the department will increase, and other ones a little less. You explain, well, this year, this department's actually doing something because we haven't found the engineer or the tradespeople to do something, so you do this. So with that, if we can, if that makes sense to you, then we can start with Article 8. This is another basic voting rights, civil rights, politics, reference, something you need to have in a charter because it reminds the public that the public, while the council are the final decision makers, it's the public that regularly, periodically, or not so, not periodically, if there's a need, some kind of emergency, it has to be. So this Article 8 is talking about initiative, referendum, and recall. This is basic politics. This always makes some elected officials nervous, but makes most elected officials appreciate what they already know, that they have to get elected. Once you get elected, they pretty easily understand if they actually like this and they want to do it again, you have to get rid of it. And we have a tendency in Texas to reelect people we elect, but that's only if they're still reflecting elections. So an initiative, talk about these three words right there, initiative, referendum. Initiative is just reminding the public that you selected the city council. They have the authority to do everything, have all the authority they need. But if you're not satisfied with what your city council is doing, you think they haven't adopted some ordinances that they won't change policy, they won't create department, or they won't clean up department. Then we have something called an initiative, where the public petitions the government, this is taken right out of the U.S. Texas Constitution, through an initiative. The public takes the initiative to tell the council, hey, you're not doing your job right. And so we want you to adopt an ordinance lowering the speed, or want you to adopt an ordinance doing something with the speed, or we want you to do something. And that's called an initiative. And there's a process in here, they literally fill out a petition. There's some details in here. It's good to have a few details, but have you done a petition or an initiative or a recall? Okay. Well, there's, when and if that happens, certainly look at your charter, but if you're not looking at state, I want to talk to your city attorney, make sure you're aware of the Texas Constitution and the United States Constitution, which all immediately, when the voter decides that they are not satisfied with actions of the elected officials, and kind of taking matters into their own. They're not throwing out the council. This is an initiative. This is first step. And it's kind of like you're saying, we can't even wait 2 years for the next election. We got to do something about this. So you have a petition, you have somebody decides what they want to do. General process that's set out here is they come, they have to decide what it is they got. They have to use a form, and there's a state form. Some cities have forms. Again, I would recommend, please just use the state's form, because every time you personalize your form, you White House-ize your form, which may be a good idea and may be helpful. But every time you do that, you're giving the person who loses the election, federal court or a state court lawsuit, to say that was an obstruction of people vote. That made it confusing. Whereas if you use the state's form, you might still have that kind of a lawsuit, but the state will defend it because it's their attorney general. Yeah. So that's why I recommend that. It's I'm an old city lawyer, so I don't like giving up the authority to Austin. But this is one of those cases where it's good to have Austin's help. And particularly in the area of voting rights, there's just not any room for local variation. We used to have it. So that's an issue. Referendum, kind of the same thing, but it's kind of a step back where you're saying, we just want you to have an election on an idea. Should the city start the process to do this? Should the city, you could have a referendum, raise taxes so that we could, fire taxes, so that we could large build a water source. A referendum, uh, not to raise taxes, to lower it. But yeah, you can use a referendum in Texas. There's a few situations where some cities too far off. Happen in some places. There was a reaction to that in some places. Fun. So they actually canceled referendums, not to raise taxes, but to specific. Put a budget back in that a council action. Not in Texas. And then this last one, recall. This is serious. This is where you say, we voters made a mistake. Like that crazy guy Gary. We cannot wait another year. We can't wait 6 months. We got to do something. So it literally is you're following the same process. You get people together, you have to use a form, you have to get a certain number of names. But you say, we're going to recall. So it's a way of unelected. Recall is simply, and yeah, we do that. If you look closely, you can probably see one. So you start off just kind of saying that. I thought initially we might need to make a lot of changes to this, but you can see the basic wording is fine. I think trying to mess with this too much kind of unnecessarily gives people who are nervous about whenever you try to change something. This is one of those articles where we need to be very careful that whatever we're doing, we're not taking away, not making it hard for people to do this. So if you do that, that's. So then when you get on the next page there, 804, the form, there's some wording in there that it's kind of clarifying the couple of things here. I highlighted that 20 signatures. I think that's a basic number for the commons. So I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea, but that's a very common idea. Then the next one, the presentation of the petitions. There's a little change there. I had another lawyer in the office who's a couple of well, 2 or 3 other charter class. And this wording was their suggestions on standardizing this with wording that's maybe a little more modern that has been adopted. So rather than saying that you have to have a certain number in order to justify the election, which are expensive, you have to have a certain number of voters. And so the old wording is not less than equal to the number, not less than 10% of, and typically it's 10% of people on the day they filed a petition, or 10% of the people that voted in the last election. Now, it's usually kind of easier to use the 10% of the people that voted in the last election, because you already have that number, your city secretary, county clerk's gonna have that. Plus, that's telling you, that's a more real number than registered voters. That's how many people bought it from. But the counter to that is, well, but isn't it fairer to use the number of registered voters on the date of the petition? I think that's up to you to decide. When I put on my city lawyer hat, but I have to think like a plaintiff's lawyer. I'm thinking that if you use the percentage of voters in the last election,
Percentage of voters that voted or the percentage of registered
Registered
voters?
whatever that,
I think registered voters.
registered voters today. Because you may have the city growing and get the city. So that in and of itself. Because part of the unrest may be that the city is should be. So I point that out, and again, I don't know if that's even worth changing, but just be aware of it.
I like that for you, but what if canceled?
The last one.
Oh.
Yeah.
The last one held,
Oh, yeah.
the last election.
One.
Because you have a hard number then, as opposed to trying to figure out how many people are registered now.
It would have been a couple of, but you know, it's canceled, she would have a registered voter.
She would still. Yeah, that's surprised. Now the can cancel election.
People who are, they may not have that opportunity. All of their races may be. Yeah, probably, if it's bad enough that you're doing a petition for.
But at this point, yes. Clearly have somebody.
I mean, because you're just wanting a number, so, like, how much would it vary? You know, like, you're just wanting a denominator.
No, well,
you know?
it is very. 6 month, year. And that can become because you think as your city's growing again. So some cities some cities are very much program. Five, not support. And other cities, even in Texas, are not. So,
If we say 10% of registered voters at the time of the city's most recent uniform election date. Whether we canceled or not, that would be every November, every, whatever, for voters or whatever, for sure.
How would you get the number otherwise? Like, if it was like today, the amount of registered voters today?
Call the county, Smith County elections and ask her how many registered voters we have. See, my concern is if we go by the last election, we didn't have an election in November.
Right.
Tested, so it would have been November of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Which we've grown significantly.
Right.
Significantly since then. And I would be concerned, I mean, I'm thinking. I just wanted to be. Perspective, if we call and ask, hey, what's our registered voters today? Would they actually, I could see some people would say, well, is that really the number?
I think that's,
Yeah.
and, but that whole answering series underlines that point I've been making, that we're talking about a city election, but who knows how many. The county does, cities. So and that's another reason why there's state law involved. Because Texas has learned not really to depend on counties in farm. So, so
The last meeting on election day, because that would be easy. We know, that, you know, the regional. I think that's a good idea. I can't see it going a different way. I'm like sitting here, what if, but, I mean, you're, yeah. I have more questions about the whole cancellation of an election than anything, like, okay, that's the thing, I don't think we're unopposed. School board would normally be having debate, and it's unopposed. Oh, okay, I haven't, submitted.
if you just have one, of course, we always want there to be an election, so we don't want to do anything to say party. We don't want to do anything to mess up participation by voters or by candidates. But it's really cool to view cancel election, because it's a little hassle. Like I mentioned, cities don't do it, there's a whole lot of coordination, and they're expensive. And they're computerized, and so there's just all kinds of details that's all kinds of details that didn't exist 75 years. So the way you're talking about is easily defended, because you're making it as easy as possible to figure out what that number is. Anybody with any level of sophistication can actually just call the county themselves, get the number, and that's what typically folks will do. They'll do it, then they'll come talk to your city secretary.
I like
They
that
won't
they-
tell you, they won't help you, just seeing if they can catch you.
I like that too, because you're like, well, you called on Monday and I called on Wednesday, and so two people registered, so now it's changed. But if you have that hard date, you know, it's more consistent, I guess.
They have more time to kind of prepare that number, right? There's a deadline to register to vote, so they make sure that they have this totally correct by the time.
Yeah,
election day
yeah.
rolls around. Like, they're just.
Yeah. I like it.
The next one, certification of the petitions and the presentation to the council. You can see this wording is instead of not earlier than 6 and less than 10, it's just within 10. Everybody understand. Things do take time.
Is that state law?
It must be, because that's real common, and I didn't suggest it. Then we get to section 808. So that it's the current charter on this one is really pretty logical. It's going in chronological. Each thing that happens, so now you get the document, petitions, you have this process to go through to verify them. I'm trying to add a little more clarity in there. Well, sometimes councils in the past would get something like that and just ignore it. Well, that's politics. You don't want to have the election. You might have a petition from a majority of the council. So, or recall. So you need to have in your charter, well, if they don't do it, what happens? Because the state law tells you they can file a lawsuit. This is just trying to clarify. It's not up to the council. Council has the authority to act. If they don't, they will be sued. And that will probably affect the vote. Then the calling of the election, again, just a reference to, we have, as you heard them saying, state. You know, calculations in there just to confuse. State elections. And then the form of the ballots. I added references in there. This is another spot where it makes a reference to the city attorney or other designated. Already have that in there. That's one of the reasons there's some wording a little earlier in the charter talks about the city. And a reference to that state law. Any questions on that? This is, and then tells you the results, and there's a lot of wording in there, but it's, I think if you read through it, it's understandable. And again, this is probably the most important, the most dangerous part of your charter to make the public suspicious. Because we're tampering with a lot of, it's already, we're trying to make it more efficient and more understandable, like we're changing their ability to do what they do when they're not happy. So everything you do is going to be interpreted. All right. Common to counties, school districts, so it's any other questions on Article 8? We'll just move on to 9. Okay, this one, again, not unusual, where you have charters and they specifically want to refer to planning and development, specifically development of subdivision, planning and zoning commission. But under state law, the planning and zoning, there's even more state law, subdivisions, development, planning and zoning commission, zoning comprehensive plans. There's more state law on that and have been for longer than all the other departments. So this is really old language to, even when this was put in the 70s, there was already state law on subdivision. So there's not a need for a home rule city to talk this much about your P and Z. You can, as long as you literally say that it's state law. So this change right here is kind of upgrading this wording to say that. But as I was going through there, I realized that based on conversations we had last time with the other departments, I think this would probably fit the discussion we've been having. If we just plan to take this out, we'll have it under the powers of the city council, a specific reference, and there's already one of it. But we'll expand it because they're the decision makers for development, subdivision, selling. But another problem with having this much, putting it in a separate article and having it this much wording in charge of P and Z is sometimes, even though the council appoints the P and Z, there have been lawsuits where the P and Z. And so this type of stuff is what encourages P and Zs. Because see, I have my own separate section, even though you appoint me, I'm not really under you. And then they find out they have a whole state law to discuss for me. So I think you just.
Legislature. They have hundreds of state laws proposed right now in the legislative session that deal with.
Yeah. anything dealing with development. And, that includes subdividing, that includes planning, that means government red tape. Increasing the cost of maybe building a house, that's possible. And that also leads to annexation. It's easier to get services if you're annexed. And cities typically maintain providing services to the areas surrounded by annex. But yes, I can guarantee you that they make annexation. And literally, I think we've already talked about annexation, subdivision, and even zoning to a certain extent. If you think about it, it's the same thing. When someone loses at the P and Z, if the council agrees with the P and Z, that person may see it and they're going to use a plaintiff's lawyer that's the same lawyer. They're going to use the same kind of wording of you're interfering with my personal American rights. Or say Texas rights do want to. And of course we are, because when you live in our cities, we don't want you to have a hog rendering plant right next to my house. And it's nice to have a plant that does that. I just don't want you to come in and pay an exorbitant price to my neighbor to buy their lot and put in a 24-hour gas station. So so that's where you probably all experienced that, and if you haven't, you can easily understand that. That's just a very different, particularly as you start going. Here in East Texas, most of our towns have as fast as that's just here. It's an issue. My experience with cities, right? It's flights.
We have a full P and Z commission. We have
But
We
one
will
vacancy.
over this next meetings. I'm just curious,
Good.
this makes me think of Cheyenne Ranch and like, there's some issues with the property owner. White House owns the land for that park. I'm just curious, why is it in this plan?
So that's not really a planning and zoning issue. That has more to do with just kind of proving ourselves. We're not subdividing anything over there, so it's already subdivided property.
They maintain the area you're talking about, the feature they maintain that. If it were dedicated to the city, we would have had it in the next meeting. Over this time, and that typically is not something the city usually wants to do. It typically would like for a developer to create an HOA to maintain all of those common areas, because we quite frankly always have. But I do have a question, if I may. Powers of the planning and zoning, like currently, it can do administrative plat reviews if it meets certain criteria. And then otherwise, it would go to planning and zoning for them to approve. If we move this all under the council, will all of the planning have to go to council? After this, P and Z, will council be the one that have to?
That's where the council could adopt, I think, and it specifically says how you're.
Okay.
Because the council, yes, the council will always have that authority, but councils, if it's explained to them, don't want that. That's a dangerous political decision making process that typical councils, when they understand it, they want step. Under those certain circumstances, that the state law allows you under these circumstances to, and it's about efficiency, cost less, and it's faster. And you can understand some developments are more complicated than others. It shouldn't be just one size fits all. There used to be, it wasn't. Now the state law recognizes. There's all kinds of. And
Yes, now too, it's a lot harder for
That,
capital.
but I can take it to P and Z and then I can take it.
Using that done in 30 days.
And that's part of the. Do it.
So, sorry, I didn't read this, so maybe it's in here and I apologize. So if I was wanting to develop on a plot of land that I buy, but it's zoned residential and it needs to be commercial, I bring it to the committee or city council, one of those two, to make a change. For zoning, that's something a little bit different, so that has to go before council, even with the way. So you would submit your application after talking, well, right now it's me. We'd have to go through it and make sure it's something we can even do, because there could be some legalities that wouldn't allow that to even happen at all, whether or not we want it to happen. If we get through that, then it would go before planning and zoning, and they would make their recommendation to city council, and the city council would have to agree and approve that. What are the things that stop people from being? Well, it has to be adjacent, whatever you're wanting to change it to, say you're wanting to change it from residential high to commercial low. If there's not a commercial low around it, that will not even, it has to be adjacent to that property, that touches that property, that zone, we can't do it. That's, consider that spots of, spots of. Texas. Things I should look at too, if I'm curious.
Let me kind of summarize this real quick to see it. So if you have land and you want to do something, well, first you have to subdivide it. And that's physically putting the land into a status where it can be something other than one great big pasture. You want two pastures. You want housing and park, and that's physically divided. So that's subdividing, and that brings up something called plat, which is a drawing of land showing it's no longer just this big drawing you see like a surveyor's ball. Now you divide it. You're subdividing it into lots. In the city, the subdivisions are all the same. There are lots beside each other, and each one has a house on it. So residential or commercial use. But that's all just making the land available. And even if you're outside of a city, but you're within a certain number of miles, cities have some authority. So cities and counties have the state controls it. Cities get to decide how they want it. Then if you're inside the city, not outside the city, you're inside the city and you're talking about, well, everybody around me is residential, but there's still some vacant lots and I want to get it. Now you're not talking about making the land ready to do something. It's use after it's developed. That's zone. So that's the city. That's why we have a planning and zoning commission. The planning part, when she says, well, we look and we have a plan that says we want all the residential here and then something between the residential and concrete plan. So we plan. You can't just put a spot or something here. That's where the politics of the difference. But that's your city and staff can be involved in part of the dividing, planning. Sometimes the city has to be involved in the planning depending on how many property it is. But the land is something, she said, planning department, NC.
I'm just curious because you talked about growth and, you know, you see a lot of like open space, especially like on 110. And I just made me curious on if someone was to buy a plot of land, would it have to be used commercial, would it have to be used residential? And then it sounds like, like you said, that they would, like the staff or the zoning committee would have to make that decision on what plat.
Because typically most sections don't like planning. You don't like to spend time and money and effort beforehand about what we're gonna do, because that's also interfering. Precious takes the second right to do whatever I want to with my land.
Well, interest has grown so quickly in the last decade even, that it's been hard
It's yeah,
for cities to plan appropriately for the amount of growth we had, so.
So we have lots of cities, that's a, you have the bigger your city gets, the more growth you have, the more that will be a problem. Lots of plans, so, lawsuits and something.
We hope to hire our first planner.
Thanks
That's
for
to catch a ball.
I feel like
Okay, so the idea here is we will, this platting of property, section 901 is talking about subdivision and platting, so that, rather than make this a separate article, I really think it would be better to just move it up where it's talking about the powers of the council. And then you can read section 902, which that's a commercial. That's an aspiration. The city council shall cooperate in every manner possible. Persons interested in the development of property within or beyond the city limits. No expenditure of public funds, however, shall be authorized for the development of privately owned subdivisions situated within or beyond the corporate limits of the city. So I can guarantee you that section, it's two sentences were written by a lawyer, but not the same one.
So
First
what,
sentence was written by the developers, the second sentence was by the city.
so what
And we
if someone,
We do all the time.
Not development.
That's also a change that's happened in the last 30 years in Texas.
what if someone involved in the planning and the council and all the things also has heavy interest in land?
That's technically, that might be a conflict of interest. And there's already a conflict of interest section that was in
Yeah.
here at the very end. And then you've already previously taken that and moved it up to the very front. However, you can see, I think under the city council, where there was already kind of a reference to be fair, be honest, we're on council. The idea of conflict of interest is you can't serve two masters. But in real current Texas, you sometimes you can. That's also changed. Used to be even the appearance of conflict. Now you have to prove that somebody has a bad. But you do need that kind of wording in here, and you have just standardized. Many cities, as they grow, the city council will adopt specific ethics. Depending upon what's happening in your city, that you get a lot of close calls. Because what people in town know about land development.
Sure.
Land.
Yeah.
Well, I think the council appreciate having clear guidelines as well, so, you know, we have a council member that works for public services, who does our trash collection, so he appreciates that he has very clear conflict of interest guidelines so that he can recuse himself. I mean, that one's pretty obvious because that's his
Yep.
the primary employer, like that one. It's pretty apparent that he needs to recuse himself.
But it's also a good example of how it can be very helpful to a town to have a big corporate finance or administrator on the council who can just talk money and business, as long as he knows he can't say, and we need to have the best contract. So those would all be moved out.
To the ordinance and now.
Okay, with a generic reference to powers of the city or powers of the city council, but then quite a bit of follow-up work from the city staff to adopt some ordinances in several sections. So there are lots of examples. But that also gives you the ability to be more council, I agree, should have done. That's how.
Well, I just think there's going to be changes to what these legislation, so you keep up with it.
We'll have more on the next. Then the next one, 904, is very, just continuing on, this is power and duties of the planning and zoning commission. So, this needs to be included, but this would be the prior section. And it would be in the form of an ordinance. And again, the idea of the council adopting an ordinance for every board that they, I just want to suggest to you, it's a really good idea. Because that way you have your authority, you know why you're creating them, and then, but you don't have to talk about quorum and numbers and attendance. You have one ordinance that applies the same for all units. And then you have a short ordinance that just says, what are the powers and duties of this board? Why do we need a P&Z? So this would be taken out and readopted in a model. The next one is comprehensive plan. I didn't make any changes on that because this is also one that just needs to be taken out. The city council should from time to time receive a comprehensive plan from the manager and plan and take appropriate action through the. And you want to be careful about that, how often you have to do that. It's expensive, you have to hire somebody, buy everything, you have to hire somebody. And then
It costs about $370,000 today. So, for plan.
Just around. Listen, I've heard a lot of things. I can go to Canada. Get a good little.
that section 906, boards and commissions, that's a really good section, but again, that needs to be taken out and adopted by the council. It's a modern form to apply to all. Building permits, you certainly should have building permits, but again, they can be taken out and the council needs to adopt an ordinance that, along with the city manager says, who's going to do your building permits, and by the way, to the extent you need direction, that needs to be in an ordinance. With the understanding that that would be taken back to the council by the manager. Also adjustments to that because the reform code stands. Condemnation is also similar one that, yes, that's an authority. So all of these things are going to have, that's why when we first started that Article 2 and Article 3 had so many references and just short phrase because we are reminding people charter is an educational tool to remind people what it does. But the details of what the city does, rather than being in the charter, should be adopted periodically by us and influenced by us. And the same with that. Pools, ponds, and lakes. Again, cities regulate swimming pools, but if you do it with whoever does your health inspection, which is probably another agency if you have restaurants and also. It shouldn't be in the charter. And as far as the water of the United States, which all the rivers and creeks in Texas are that flow into the Gulf, that's regulated by the United States government, the U.S. government. And the state of Texas when it comes to water. So you're third in line, nobody cares. You're actually fifth in line because now we have, every river in Texas has a board authority that's political, and then they have sub-basin. So you're about literally fifth. So there's a lot of politics. Water. So with that, I think my task is then to put all this back together with these additional changes. Really, let me say this out loud. I think as a group and as staff, you're both suggesting you're supportive of a streamlined, updated, more modern charter that keeps what White House needs and wants as a home rule city, but which reflects current reality of federal law and state law. It's really telling you how you do most of this. And so the step is I'll create another draft that looks like these, send that to the staff. Once they're comfortable with it, they'll send it to you. Then we actually have another meeting set in 2 weeks. But we might want to look at that and see how quickly we can finish this so that you have time to look this next draft and get it.
Yeah, I think the next one was gonna be for 10 and 11, but 10 and 11 were already.
We've already talked about
Yes.
them. They'll be in distress. So we might be ready to have that meeting in 2 weeks. I'm behind. I'm feeling better, but my goal is to have that out to staff this week. But you can understand when they get it, they need some time to make sure the staff is comfortable with it before they send it to you. Because I'm just a writer here and a suggester. They're the ones that are gonna explain it, have to, along with you, make sure the council understands. And then the council will go through all this.
Twelve, because either part of the school review, each one, so. Well, yes. Yeah, it is good, I'm not complaining. Yeah, so let's see where kind of where we are on Friday, and we'll let you know. So,
Yeah, I think I would say that, I don't know, want to be here if it's not something that y'all are prepared to do. So we're just here to support you, your work.
Well, and let me remind you that we were talking a little bit about elections tonight, so your planning director, the city secretary, is also already talking with the county about the election. Start after election, contract that describes it. You have to decide how many voters you think you're gonna have. But if you're amending your charter, you have to come up with ballot wording, just like we do all petitions. So there's a lot of work on that, and that's already stages. We don't know if the council is gonna even wanna vote to amend, submit something to voters. But we'll have to prepare all that document so that we'll be ready, because it takes quite a bit of time. And you can understand the ballot propositions with changing this have to be, each ballot proposition has to be a question. Ideally, it's a yes or no. You can understand, you can't ask a question that's got 3 answers, A, B, and C. So this will be a little more complicated to write those ballot propositions, but the whole idea here is trying to simplify it. It's gonna all, should come together.
what are y'all's calendars look like if we just plan to meet on May 19th? Because if we miss the 12th, the next one would miss. So. I mean, that's we, by this in a week and then.
Works for me.
Yes. So,
We.
Let me check
Yeah.
that.
who you know,
T-bar.
Every, but it's okay, it's fun. It's 6. Yeah.
Two places. Let's plan for that.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a Parks meeting that night, but it's tentative, so I can just reschedule it.
No, thank you for your patience. There's a lot of detail in this. It's helpful, and I know it's helpful for the staff too, to add a few more people that understand what the city really does. Why the wording of this document can make it easier or more comfortable.
All right, yes,
Thanks for dinner.
A motion to adjourn.
Oh,
yeah.
I'll second.
All right.